Here's kind of a big segment, and we're going to start it out with this piece of video here from a Case Study QB. Thanks, as always, for the work that you do, my friend. Leah Wright-Rigor says the results was the result of the Democrats never learning the lesson from 2016, and that Bernie Sanders will be important to convincing Dems to talk about bread and butter issues. So here she is on election night as the results were coming in.
I think this is the leftovers of the 2016 kind of mess, that there were all of these issues that the Democratic Party saw laid out very clearly in 2016 after Hillary Clinton's loss, and that rather than address those issues, they moved and they migrated. What happened is that the pandemic, right? The pandemic came upon us, and Joe Biden happened to be the person for the pandemic. And I think they mistook that moment for a referendum on what the Democrats had to offer, rather than being introspective.
Okay, so that's kind of interesting. I mean,
I wonder what she's going to do for a job now.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I mean,
I cannot believe somebody was on CNN telling the truth like that.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing I would slightly quibble with is that, Biden being the man for the pandemic, I think any Democrat probably could have won given the pandemic and Trump's performance. Like the non-entity factor of Biden is what worked.
But the big picture, she's got it. Like,
she's got it. That they took that as
to Trump.
Exactly.
People pick Biden.
Right. They took that as validation of their worldview as opposed to a fluke where they got lucky. Yeah, absolutely.
See, we didn't need those Bernie bros, just like we said.
Right.
I'll tell you one other person who I think is going to be incredibly important. Actually, two other people. The first person is Bernie Sanders. Mm-hmm. One of the things that Bernie Sanders has been saying since at least 2014 has been about how the Democratic Party, if it wants to keep these coalitions, needs to talk about bread and butter issues. It needs to talk about politics. A lot of people attacked him for that, saying, well, are you saying that cultural politics don't matter? That's not what he was saying. He was saying we need to focus on these things. The other person is Stacey Abrams. We have not heard a lot from Stacey Abrams in this election cycle, but her organizations, particularly Fair Fight, the New Georgia Voter Project, and other organizations were instrumental in pulling together coalitions that ended up winning Joe Biden Georgia in 2020, but also Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin.
See, I don't know enough about that to comment on that. Where were they this year? I mean,
yeah, actually, I haven't even. This is the first I hear anyone even bring it up.
Yeah, like I don't know where she was this year. Did they have a falling out? Something? But anyway, that's not really the point of the segment. On the Bernie front, yeah, obviously that's correct.
Probably working for a defense contractor now.
Yeah, exactly. And you had people talk about this on election night in 2016 when Hillary lost, that the ghost of Bernie Sanders looms large over this result. Well, here you have it one more time. Bernie tweets out November 6th, yesterday, it should come as no great surprise that a Democratic Party which has abandoned working class people would find that the working class has abandoned them. While the Democratic leadership defends the status quo, the American people are angry and want change, and they're right. So I'll read this.
It's really too bad we didn't have anybody who could have blown this party apart by running as an independent.
Yeah.
Too bad.
8 years ago. Right. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. It should come as no great surprise that a Democratic Party, which has abandoned working class people, would find that the working class has abandoned them. First, it was the white working class, and now it is Latino and black workers as well. While the Democratic leadership defends the status quo, the American people are angry and want change, and they're right. Today, while the very rich are doing phenomenally well, 60% of Americans live paycheck to paycheck, and we have more income and wealth inequality than ever before. Unbelievably, real inflation accounted for weekly wages for the average American worker are actually lower now than they were 50 years ago. Today, despite an explosion in technology and worker productivity, many young people will have a worse standard of living than their parents, and many of them worry that AI and robotics will make a bad situation even worse. Today, despite spending far more per capita than other countries, we remain the only wealthy nation not to guarantee health care to all as a human right, and we pay by far the highest prices in the world for prescription drugs. We alone, among major countries, cannot even guarantee paid family and medical leave. Today, despite strong opposition from a majority of Americans, we continue to spend billions funding the extremist Netanyahu government's all-out war against the Palestinian people. which has led to the horrific humanitarian disaster of mass malnutrition and the starvation of thousands of children. Would the big money interests and well-paid consultants who control the Democratic Party learn any real lessons from this disastrous campaign? Will they understand the pain and political alienation that tens of millions of Americans are experiencing? Do they have any ideas as to how we can take on the increasingly powerful oligarchy, which has so much economic and political power? Probably not. In the coming weeks and months, those of us concerned about grassroots democracy and economic justice need to have some very serious conversations, serious political discussions. Stay tuned. Okay, well, these discussions should include Bernie himself. These discussions should include the fact that, yes, he had the opportunity in 2016 to break away and take millions of people with him to actually get a new party off the ground. Like those opportunities come
he had the
come
juice.
across once in a very long while, and he had the juice and could have done that. I don't think now he has the cachet to get it started, even if he wanted to, and that's the real tragedy.
Nobody trusts him anymore.
Right, because nobody trusts him anymore.
Who's going to get behind him? Who's going to get behind Bernie Sanders?
Yeah.
Why? So he can tell you have to vote for the Democrats?
Well, this is why no one trusts him here. So here, I hope our friend Jacob is watching this. Andre Damon from the World Socialist website says Bernie Sanders said 10 days ago that Biden has been the most progressive pro-worker president since FDR. Yep, 10 days ago. 10 days ago. Week before the election, his closing pitch is this.
I believe that President Biden in many ways has been the most progressive pro-worker president since FDR.
That's not what you're saying now.
That's not what you're saying now. Exactly. You were in good soldier mode, and this is why you couldn't get a third party off the ground now if you tried, because you've lost that trust. Well, you've also pissed the DNC chair, Jamie Harrison, who quote tweets Bernie and says, "This is straight up BS. Biden was the most pro-worker president of my lifetime." Now, to be fair, Bernie did say that himself.
Maybe that's a sad statement on the people who preceded him.
Yeah.
Maybe that's a leper with the most fingers contest. Was he more pro-worker than Obama? Sure. Obama was a guy that ignored the union workers, state workers striking in, what was it, Wisconsin?
Yeah, the teachers, yeah.
Completely ignored them. So, yeah, was he more pro-union than Obama? Obama was less pro-union than Reagan.
Yeah. Yep. Biden was the most pro-worker president of my lifetime, saved union pensions, created millions of good-paying jobs, and even marched in a picket line. Oh, yeah, he showed up to the UAW.
God bless him.
And some of MVP's plans would have fundamentally transformed the quality of life and closed the racial wealth gap for working people across this country. From the child tax credits, which he let expire without a fight, to $25K for a down payment on a house, which never came to be. That was a Kamala promise. That was not a Biden record. Yeah. To the cost of senior health care in their homes, these are a lot of post-election takes, and this one ain't a good one. It's actually one of the only good ones to come out of Democratic Party circles. Now, unfortunately, the messenger is flawed, to say the least, since he was saying what you're saying there, which is that Biden was the most pro-worker president of his lifetime.
That's what he's saying a week
10 days ago. Right, exactly. Yep. Exactly. So all that criticism aside, the message itself is the only thing that has a prayer of saving the Democratic Party from irrelevance. And, credit where credit's due here.
But it's probably too late, because that whole demographic has now been lured into Trump world. Exactly. And once people are branded, they're branded. Why you think Camel cigarettes, until they were forced not to, had a cartoon camel to get kids to start smoking Camels, so they'd be branded for life. Now they're branded. You had an opportunity. These people could have been Democrats. Now they're Republicans, and you're going to have a hell of a time getting them to change their minds.
Well, you talk about people who the Democrats could have had. Crystal Ball writes this article for Drop Site News. Dems have spent the past 8 years destroying the one movement that could have saved them. Bernie's class-first populism won over exactly the type of voters, Latinos, working class, bros, Joe Rogan, that Dems now repel. Exactly. Look at how your numbers fell apart with Latinos and young men, specifically, Joe Rogan being the cherry on top since he endorsed Bernie 4 years ago and Trump now, and, of course, the working class, generally speaking. So, a segment from this article, the path not taken in 2016 looms larger than ever. Bernie's coalition was filled with the exact type of voters who are now flocking to Donald Trump, working class voters of all races, young people, and critically, the much derided bros. The top contributors to that's really the most glaring thing. I didn't even think of that, but that's actually a good point. Like, the bros are now Trump bros, whereas what did they call us? They called us bros. Like that was
bros.
Yeah,
Bernie
exactly.
Bros, right?
Like, I didn't even put that together. It was kind of hidden in plain sight. So props to her for noticing that. I think it's a good point. The top contributors to Bernie's campaign often held jobs at places like Amazon and Walmart. The unions loved him. And never forget, he earned the coveted Joe Rogan endorsement that Trump also received the day before the election this year.
But right there, and this is where you have to blame Bernie. Under pressure, he didn't lean into it. He didn't embrace it.
Right. Exactly. They didn't want to tout that. They touted it a little bit. AOC made us think about it, and so they shut up about it. They didn't tout it as much after that. It turns out the Bernie to Trump pipeline is real. While that has always been used as an epithet to smear Bernie and his movement, that's interesting because you know who did kind of use that as an epithet just a couple months ago when you were shilling for Kamala's? You, Crystal Ball. Yeah, Tulsi backs Trump. Is the Bernie to Trump pipeline real? They use that as a negative. So you just have to kind of point that out here. Anyway, I digress. Back to the article. While that has always been used as an epithet to smear Bernie and his movement, with the implication that social democracy is just a cover for or gateway drug to right-wing authoritarianism, the truth is that this pipeline speaks to the power and appeal of Bernie's vision as an effective antidote to Trumpism. When these voters had a choice between Trump and Bernie, they chose Bernie. For many of them, now that the choice is between Trump and the dried-out husk of neoliberalism, they're going to Trump. Once again, if that's how you felt about it, then why'd you make this little video basically trashing the Bernie to Trump pipeline? Not as much empathy during campaign season, I suppose. That explains it. But here are some numbers. Okay, so this is Jeff Stein for the Washington Post. Put out this breakdown.
Never let the truth get in the way of podcast fighting.
Right, yeah, exactly. Staggering class realignment shift in working class. Harris lost despite major shift of affluent voters her way. Now, another way to phrase that is she lost because of a major shift in affluent voters her way. Perhaps she lost because she targeted well-to-do, affluent conservative independents to the exclusion of working class people of all racial and ethnic and religious backgrounds. But here are some really startling figures here. So in 2020, Trump wins voters over 100K, 54 to 42. That must have been a typo on his part. 2024, Harris wins voters over 100K, 54 to 45. That's pretty amazing that Trump lost the rich vote this year. I mean, the Republican never loses the rich vote. Even back when Trump was making inroads with working class people, the Republicans were still, on a whole, the party of the rich more than the Democrats were. They still won with rich people.
That was a point Democrats kept making when you made a class argument about Trump, ignoring the fact that just because he wasn't winning that class didn't mean he wasn't making inroads with that class, clearly. But they would say, well, no, but he won the people making more than $100,000 a year.
Right.
So what do you have to say now?
Now you can't say that. Now this was the only demographic that skewed Democrat were the rich. In 2020, Biden wins voters 50K to 100K, meaning middle-class voters, although that's not a middle-class income anymore with inflation, but 57 to 42. In 2024, Trump wins voters 50 to 100K, 49-47. In 2020, Biden wins voters under 50,000 by 10 points, 55-45. In 2024, Trump, massive improvement with voters who make under 50,000 a year, 49 to 48. You had Donald Trump defeating Kamala Harris among those at the low rung of the income ladder. Those are astounding numbers. And that shows you why this was a wave. This was a wave. Yep. These are nationwide numbers. This is not in one or two states or a swing this or that. This is nationwide numbers. You have Democrats winning the rich. You have Republicans winning the middle class, the working class. It doesn't demark any line lower than 50K. But let's face it. in this inflation environment, anything under 50K, that is essentially a poverty wage. If you're doing less than 50K in 2024 with eggs being, $5 a dozen or whatever. Yeah, I mean that is brutal. That is damning. That is absolutely damning. So Chris Cuomo pushes back a little bit against Maxine Waters when she tries to blame this on the fact that Kamala was a black woman and that America didn't want to vote for a black woman. He pushes back a little bit on this. Let's see this.
What is the lesson that your party should have learned?
Well, the Democratic Party worked very hard, and they raised, substantial sum of money. We had great candidates, and so Trump had a following. Basically, generally led by whites. White males voted in big numbers. He had a few from the other race groups that joined in, like the Latinos at 45%, and black men at about the same rate that they did when they voted for him before, at about 20%. That combination won. And so it is not that Democrats did not work hard, did not do a great job. We had an unusual situation where we had a black woman, which this country has never seen before. A combination of all of those things led to his win.
I will not push back on the idea that race and sex matter in American politics. I think they do. I don't know that it was the controlling variable, and you don't suggest otherwise. To me, it seemed to be that the Democrats thought Trump stinks is enough. And Senator Bernie Sanders said something that reminded me of you, which is why I wanted you on the show tonight, Maxine, which is Democratic Party used to be, we are all about doing for working people. That's what we do. That's what Mario Cuomo's party, that's what Maxine Waters' party was. You are now seen as not that, even by Bernie Sanders.
You are now seen as the opposite of that, even by Bernie Sanders. So that just kind of bookends nicely with this clip we played at the start of the segment. And it's funny how on election night, the week after election day, when Democrats take a bath, the media gives some validation to Bernie and to the Bernie movement and said, maybe you should have gone that way. Why is it, though, that every time some kind of social spending is up for debate, they just piss all over it? Like, there's never any follow through, even with Build Back Better. It's, well, this is going to drive inflation. We can't do paid family leave, or, you can't make the child tax credit permanent. That's too expensive. It costs too much money. There never actually is any follow through about that. They always try and fuse the culture war stuff with the economic stuff. On MSNBC, Simone Sanders, there was this exchange between Donnie Deutsch and Simone Sanders where Deutsch says, well, the Democrats have to move to the center. And Simone says, well, by center, what do you mean? You mean we shouldn't care about trans people anymore? That's where the brain goes. That's where the brain goes. Yeah. Because that's the only debate the media can create.
Well, that's by design. And that's what we're going to see when we get into The View. Why do these people get a platform? Why do they get a microphone? Why have I noticed a shift over the last couple days towards the libs all falling back on the old trope? It's sexism, it's racism. Why? Because that is the instructions that they're getting from the media figures that they turn to for explanations and for framing. Those people are in that position for that reason. They want any conversation to take place except for a conversation about class, economics, militarism. They want us all fighting each other over racism, sexism, homophobia, transgenderism, which I have said this again and again. The idea that the reason that particular issue has been elevated as compassion is fucking absurd. It's absurd. If the issue were suffering children, you would talk about children growing up in poverty, for whom the statistics on self-deletion are much worse than for transgender children. There are far more of them than there are of transgender children. So if the issue is we have terrible sadness about the suffering of children, we'd be talking about poor children, right? But you're not. You're not. And very often the answer will be, we can walk and chew gum at the same time. You can, but you don't.
No, they don't.
You don't. Why
They
is
don't.
that? They give a platform and a microphone to people who will elevate these bizarre, for most people completely irrelevant culture issues to avoid a meaningful discussion. Every minute that we're fighting about racism and sexism and the various panoply of phobias is another second that nobody is interfering with what the ruling class is doing. They have a free hand as long as you're down in the mud fighting about fucking nonsense.
Yeah. Yeah. And there will never be a reckoning about that on the mainstream media in any real way.
That's what they're there for.
They pay lip service to it after Election Day. That's where you hear Chris Cuomo say that. For a minute. That's where you hear that woman on CNN. For a minute, they'll say, hey, maybe they should have taken Bernie a little bit more seriously. Maybe they shouldn't have sabotaged his movement, whether it was on behalf of Hillary Clinton or Joe Biden, depending on the year you put this out. But like I said at the top of the live stream, this represents a wave of bad decisions, one after the other after another, which you really can't call bad decisions. It was intentional. The intentional destruction and sabotage of the Bernie movement is what landed you here. And in a post-mortem, the week after an election landslide rout, they'll talk as if they actually are prepared to start taking that approach seriously, but they're not. But they're not. Lee Fong makes a good point.
They're not
here.
Because that's not their purpose.
Yes.
That's why we always said they'd rather lose to Trump than win with Bernie. Because for them to win with Bernie, that is more existential than losing to Trump. Because at that point, they've lost the party in every meaningful way.
Exactly. So Lee Fong says there are no Dems with Bernie's 1991 to 2016 record of focusing solely on class and eschewing culture war, moderate on guns, anti-mass migration, over wage concerns, pro-police funding. Even Bernie abandoned his own record in 2020 and embraced rad-lib left weirdness. There's no bench. That's true. Right. There is no bench. There is no bench. And,
every speech in 2020. We're against homophobia and racism and sexism. Every speech he started with that shit.
Well, there's a reason for that, and I will, I guess, die on this hill because I've said this over and over again. In 2020, he had no choice but to run that campaign the way he did. He had no choice but to embrace the rad-lib left weirdness because the populists who really fueled the 2016 campaign had either checked out or they voted for Donald Trump. Don't forget, 12% of the Bernie movement voted for Trump. So by 2020, there was no one left in the party to vote for a purely class-based, economics-driven sort of left populist campaign. He had to do it on their terms. This is why we Dem exited, because I realized that was an inevitable design flaw of the campaign going in. I said, look, he has no choice but to do this. They say, why is he parroting the Russiagate talking points? He has no choice. He's running as a Democrat. All the real populists left after the 2016 campaign. So now his only hope is to win over some of these libs. And that's why in 2016, he peaked at 47%. In 2020, even when he was primed to win the primary, he's peaking at 35% and taking advantage of the fact that there were 10 other candidates in the race. Because the libs just dominated the party to the point where if you wanted to be competitive at all, you had to sound more or less like a Democrat when you spoke. And that's why that campaign did not have the grittiness and the teeth and the mass appeal that the 2016 campaign did. 4 years out from that, what Lee Fong says here is absolutely right. There's no bench. There's no one who can speak that language.
The
and
squad
now
was supposed to be our bench.
Yeah, well, exactly. And now you're triply screwed because now what these election results show is that now the working people, they're with Trump.
Right.
They're with Trump. Now, the Republicans have to kind of choose their successor carefully. Obviously, J.D. Vance is going to have a huge leg up on the competition in 2028. I would bet there's probably a 75% chance of him being the nominee right now. Depending on how these 4 years go, he might be the guy they pass the torch to. The Republicans have to be careful not to step back into the sort of Mitt Romney lane, which I don't think they can afford to do at this point, and I don't think they will. I don't think the primary voters will stand for that at this point, because look at the composition of the party now. It's now a workers' party.
4 years of Trump will wipe out that wing of the party, more or less.
Exactly. So it's now a workers' party. So now, if you're the Democrats, where the hell do you go?
Right.
Where do you go? If this was an election,
completely irrelevant party now.
Yeah, exactly. Like if this was an election that was lost at the margins, lost in a couple different states, if Kamala won the popular vote, you could say, okay, we could stay in and grind our way out. Next time, with a result as sweeping as this, where do you go for working class politics in the Democratic Party? Nowhere.
This we see this all through the whole liberal class project of the last decade or so, really in its purest form of the last decade or so. And this is why I say there's a cultural element as well as an economic element. Wealthy, privileged people are by definition a minority of the population. This particular iteration of the upper class grew so completely out of touch with the public in regards to manufacturing policy, in regards to cultural issues, right down to its views on just core moral values, just became completely out of touch with the population. And rather than to really try to persuade with the manner of aristocrats in all ages, they thought they were going to be able to dictate morality and dictate taste and dictate economic theory to the masses. They thought they were going to be able to piss on people's legs and tell them it's raining. Right. Well, no, your town is not a hellhole because starting with Bill Clinton, we've been signing trade deals that deindustrialized it. It's that you've got too much racism and sexism in your town. That's why your town's a hellhole. You know what? You actually deserve it. You brought this on yourself because you didn't learn to code, you fucking racist. They thought all across, not just in the politics and culture and academia, they thought they were going to be able to take their worldview, a very bizarre worldview in my opinion, and impose it in film, in the university, in politics. They were going to tell the fucking peasants what to think. And unfortunately, and in spite of what some people might feel about 2020, the peasants still get to vote. Now, if that, I'm sorry, some people might not want to hear this. If this didn't prove that the Stop the Steal thing was bullshit, what would? So they did that then, but not this time? Why? Why not this time? Why last time and not this time? Okay, so the peasants still get a vote, and this is the final result of a failed liberal project to socially engineer people into accepting a very academic, very elite, very privileged view of the world in which, well, globalization, what are you going to do, is the answer to economic dislocation. And hey, man, if your son likes to put on dresses, well, we need to sterilize your kid. They tried to impose this from the top on people, and this is the end result. From economics to culture on every level, they cultivated a worldview that the vast majority, not a small majority, the vast majority of people do not accept. And here we are. It's the end of the liberal project as we know it. That's why I keep saying this particular election is going to create a culture shift very quickly of a type that we haven't seen since Reagan's election.
Yeah, and it did not have to be that way. You had a great opportunity under Obama to really turn the page. It's not that Obama was the first Democrat to screw working people. Obviously, you had Jimmy Carter, I would argue, really greased the skids for the Reagan era. And then you had Bill Clinton, obviously, with NAFTA. Clinton was very much a Reagan-era Democrat. Clinton did not really have the opportunity to redefine an era in American politics. Obama did, given the destruction of the Bush years. Given the landslide, don't forget, Obama won by a bigger landslide in 2008 than Trump won just now. He had a chance to redefine the core assumptions that underlie American politics. That should have been the beginning of a new era. It should have been an Obama era. It could have been the Obama era. Instead, he basically continued the Bill Clinton policies that was just an extension of the Reagan era, and now we're in the Trump era. They could have, you could have had a Bernie era, now you have a Trump era. So that is the story of this failure. And it's a story with a lot of moving parts. You can't pin it down to 1, 2, or 3 events. A landslide like this, you really can't. And so that is how you got here. That is how you got here.
If you need to sum it up in just one idea, it's this. There was never a natural base for a Wall Street-owned left party. Exactly. That was never going to work long term. That was always bound to fall apart under the weight of its own contradictions.
Please clap.